Hi, I'm Rachel and Happy New Year! This is my first video of 2018 and I am here to talk about my top 4 favorite books of 2017 and then 4-ish anticipated reads of 2018. And I think I'll put in a little note at the end about my feelings on BookTube. So I feel a little awkward because 6 months ago in June for my mid-year freakout tag, I talked about my 2 top books so far of the year, and those haven't changed. I do have 2 more books to talk about, as I mentioned, and maybe it's a good thing to keep this video short. So I'll just talk a bit about each of the books and why it stuck with me. So the first book I want to talk about is Surrender Dorothy by Meg Wolitzer. It's been a Meg Wolitzer couple of years for me as I've been slowly reading through her backlist. And now she has 2 new titles, and I'll be talking about one of them later. And actually, I just downloaded the ebook for the Best American Short Stories collection that she edited, so I'm hoping to get through that this month. This book she wrote in the late 90s, and it's about a young woman who dies in a fatal car accident, and about her mother and her friends who come together in this, shocking time of grief. But what really sticks with me about this story is it's about relationships from a very self-centered point of view. But I think it's about the truth behind relationships. It looks into the fact that none of us can really move beyond our own experiences and perceptions of people. And that's just sort of where we come from, being in our own heads rather than omnipotent. And so I found it fascinating to get a brief glimpse into the girl's head about who she was and where she was in her life, and then to see where her closest friends were and how they, and her mother was, and how they contextualized her into their lives. And then we even got 1 or 2 people who were a little less close to her, and we got to see how they fit in with the group. And I just found it a fascinating, multifaceted way to look at grief and at relationships, and I thought it was just so real and raw and visceral in that way. And meanwhile, these characters, in getting to know each other, get to grow a bit on their own. The next book I have to talk about, I guess technically number 3 on my favorites list, is Human Acts by Kang and translated by Deborah Smith. And this book chronicles an actual uprising in the 70s that happened in South Korea, and sort of the brutal smackdown of that. But the way it talks about this brutality, I think, is just so visceral, to use that word again, and so unique to anything I've ever seen before. We go into first the decompositions of bodies and just the physical cost of this high amount of carnage. And as the book goes on in years, we see how the mental toll of what's happening just changes, but shows us a pretty dark side of humanity, but a side that is worth reckoning with. I just found it very haunting and very effective. And number 2 I don't have in physical copy because I listened to it on audiobook, so I will insert a picture. It's a science fiction novel called Planetfall by Newman. In Planetfall, we are in Ren's head. She is on this planet that her charismatic lover had a vision of on Earth and led a expedition to. But now it's about 20 years later, and her lover has gone up the proverbial mountain, as it were, to commune with a godhead that she has thought that she's heard, and the rest of the community is making do with their society down below when a mysterious stranger comes to town, and some secrets about the past are revealed. But the most fascinating part about this story to me is that Ren is such an unreliable narrator, so we and she get to reveal a much deeper truth about what's going on here, and also about Ren's mental disability, and it's a very touching, tragic portrait of that. It's also a book that's both about science and about faith, and I really appreciate books that can meld the 2 of those. And finally, my #1 book of 2017 is this chunker, To the End of the Land by David Grossman and translated by Jessica Cohen. It takes place in Israel, where this woman, her son, goes off on a sort of last-minute military excursion, and she feels certain that he could die in this. He certainly could die, and that she doesn't want to sit there and wait for the news of his death. So she takes her old friend and the boy's father, and they go off into the Galilee, which is sort of like a wilderness part of Israel, and they do this really long excursion walking trip where they hash out over their lives and their complicated histories, and our narrator Aura's feelings as a mother and as a lover, and how her life has taken her in these directions. It's a stream of consciousness novel that works because they're out in the middle of nowhere, so there's not always a lot of time for the present to intrude on them, although of course sometimes it does. But it's mostly about being able to probe these relationships, and there's a little bit of what you might call a love triangle in it, but I don't think it's really that traditional, especially because Aura's husband, Delon, I had the feeling at first he'd be somewhat of a jerk, but he ends up to be much more multifaceted too. They're all multifaceted, and they have ghosts, and they have histories, and they have relations with these boys, and relations about their country and their beliefs about Judaism and nationality, and it's so full and so lush, and I just loved going on this journey with these people so much. And a particular note that still stands out to me all these months later is how I don't believe being parents was a footnote to these people. I mean, even though the two boys who were Aura's sons are, you know, secondary characters, the way that her relationship with them unfolds, it's a huge part of her identity. It's not just some anecdote to her character. It is real, and it feels like she really is a parent rather than playing one on TV as she worries about her children and their individual, you know, problems and issues. And I guess I could go on and on about this, and I have been for over half a year, but it was a very moving and provocative novel, and I'm so glad that I finally got to it. So I'll go in chronological order for my anticipated reads of 2018. Coming out on March 6th, we have Girls Burn Brighter by Shobha Rao. I read Shobha Rao's short story collection, An Unrestored Woman, earlier this year, and it was another of my 5-star reads. I really, really loved it. So when I saw this come up, I knew I should give it a chance, and I'll read from Goodreads about it. A searing, electrifying debut novel set in India and America about a once-in-a-lifetime friendship between two girls who are driven apart but never stop trying to find one another again. When Purnima first meets Savitha, she feels something she thought she lost for good when her mother died: hope. Purnima's father hires Savitha to work on one of their sari looms, and the two girls are quickly drawn to one another. Savitha is even more impoverished than Purnima, but she is full of passion and energy. She shows Purnima how to find beauty in a bit of indigo cloth, a bowl of yogurt, rice, and bananas, the warmth of a friendship. Suddenly, their Indian village doesn't feel quite so claustrophobic, and Purnima begins to imagine a life beyond the arranged marriage her father is desperate to lock down for her. But when a devastating act of cruelty drives Savitha away, Purnima leaves behind everything she has ever known to find her friend again. Her journey takes her into the darkest corners of India's underworld, on a harrowing cross-continental journey, and eventually to an apartment complex in Seattle. Alternating between the girls' perspectives as they face relentless obstacles, Girls Burn Brighter introduces two heroines who never lose the hope that burns within them. I think there is a little something about this that gives me pause. Not too recently, but a couple of years ago, I read fair amount of novels set in India about women, about young girls and women, and I guess I feel a little burned out on it still, but I'm really hoping that Shobha Rao goes a little into the politics and into the broader world than just their friendship, which I'm assuming will have to happen once they leave their hometown and go on this big adventure, as it were. It's something that she did so well in An Unrestored Woman, which looks at the partition of India and Pakistan and other issues facing India for several decades. And anyway, there's another Indian-American author who has a book coming out at that time. Not that I really want to compare these two, but it's Jhumpa Lahiri, and she is one of my favorite authors. And this is technically not her book. It is, she did the Italian translation of a new book by Domenico Stranone. This one is called Trick. She did another one called Ties last year, and I thought it was pretty good. I enjoyed it, but I'm not sure I definitely want to put this book on my definite to-read list just because I don't want to bog myself down too much, but I might get to it. But meanwhile, Shobha Rao also has that beautiful lyricism and that attention to character detail, so I'm looking forward to the fact that she's continuing to write about India and about women like this, because Jhumpa Lahiri is mostly doing Italian translations now. The second book on my list comes out April 3rd. It is The Female Persuasion by Meg Wolitzer. Yes, she is back again, here to write the book that I understand almost everybody in the literary world is going to want to read. So I will read from Goodreads. Greer Kadetsky is a shy college freshman when she meets the woman she hopes will change her life. Faith Frank, dazzlingly persuasive and elegant at 63, has been a central pillar of the women's movement for decades, a figure who inspires others to influence the world. Upon hearing Faith speak for the first time, Greer, madly in love with her boyfriend Corey, but still full of longing for an ambition she can't quite place, feels her inner world light up. Then, astonishingly, Faith invites Greer to make something out of that sense of purpose, leading Greer down the most exciting path of her life as it winds toward and away from her meant-to-be love story with Corey and the future she'd always imagined. Meg Wolitzer writes so well about women and their issues and their relationships, and this one I think is one of the first that's about an intergenerational relationship that ties upon life ambitions, so very, very excited. I actually went ahead and I saw a week or so ago that my library already has the book on order, so I went ahead and added myself to the list. I am number 9, but I assume that I'll get the book relatively quickly because I imagine, given all the hype I'm hearing about this, that they'll order a lot of copies, so here's to hoping. The next book on my list comes out on April 17th, and it is another repeat author. This is Before Mars by Emma Newman. And yes, it is a book that is a standalone, but it's in the same universe as Planetfall. I'll read about it from Goodreads. After months of travel, Anna Kubrick finally arrives on Mars for her new job as a geologist and a de facto artist in residence. Already, she feels like she is losing the connection with her husband and baby at home on Earth, and she'll be on Mars for over a year. Throwing herself into her work, she tries her best to fit in with the team. But in her new room on base, Anna finds a mysterious note written in her own handwriting, warning her not to trust the colony psychologist. A note she can't remember writing. She unpacks her wedding ring, only to find that it has been replaced by a fake. Finding a footprint in a place the colony AI claims has never been visited by humans, Anna begins to suspect that her assignment isn't as simple as she was led to believe. Is she caught up in an elaborate corporate conspiracy, or is she actually losing her mind? Regardless of what horrors she might discover or what they might have to do with her sanity, Anna has to find the truth before her own mind destroys her. I think this book has a little bit more of the mystery suspense genre feel that I'm usually interested in, but this is Emma Newman, and she seems to also be writing about a new character who has mental issues, and I don't mean that diminutively. I believe that she'll write a fully fledged character and hopefully will get a broader understanding into her emotions and her mindset, and it won't just all be about plot. That's what I hope, and it almost sounds vaguely like Artemis by Andy Weir, but in terms of writing characters, I gotta say I'm definitely more on board for Emma Newman. And the final book that I'll talk about specifically on this list comes out on May 15th. It is The Mars Room by Rachel Kushner. I believe this has no particular association with the Emma Newman book, but man, that would make it a lot quicker to read both of these if they took place in the same world, as it were. This one actually isn't up on Goodreads yet, so I'll read from Amazon. From twice National Book Award nominated Rachel Kushner, whose Flamethrowers was called the best, most brazen, most interesting book of the year, comes a spectacularly compelling, heart-stopping novel about a life gone off the rails in contemporary America. It's 2003, and Romy Hall is at the start of 2 consecutive life sentences at the Stanville Women's Correctional Facility, deep in California's Central Valley. Outside is the world from which she has been severed, the San Francisco of her youth and her young son Jackson. Inside is a new reality, thousands of women hustling for the bare essentials needed to survive, the bluffing and pageantry and casual acts of violence by the guards and prisoners alike, and the deadpan absurdities of institutional living, which Kushner evokes with great humor and precision. I think it took me just a little while to parse why this description stood out so much to me and intrigued me, and I believe it's really because it's about an insular community. I've talked before about one of my other favorite novelists, Allegra Goodman, and how she is able to get into the workings of an insular community, whether it's an ultra-Orthodox enclave in the Catskills or a science lab of oncologists. And this one's going to be a prison. Talk about an insular community where there's no getting out of it. And the rules are very, very different. And another thing that particularly intrigues me is that I assume this woman is no saint if she is serving a 2 consecutive sentence term here. I'm hoping she's a flawed character. And that should lend an interesting aspect to the story. So yeah. And on a final note, I will add a link to a video that I did in September of several science fiction and fantasy reads, and most of them are coming out in the first half of next year. So I will quickly go ahead and list them and their release dates for more books that are niggling at me to read, on top of all of the backlist and other things that I want to read this year. So before I sign off, I thought I'd say a quick word about BookTube. I've been on BookTube actually for a couple of years, but 2017 was the first full year, or mostly full year, where I was pretty public about being out here, and I increased my videos output by a lot. And I started de-lurking and interacting with more of you, and so my experience has changed mightily since the beginning of last year. But be that as it may, I'm still very much a small fry booktuber, and admittedly, sometimes I'm disappointed that I'm not having the types of experiences that some of my favorite people here on BookTube seem to be having on their channels. But, you know, I just gotta keep being me. As everyone says all the time, you have to be yourself in your videos, and that's what I try to do, and I also try to read what I want to read, because otherwise it would be a bit of a waste, I guess, to not read what you want. And so I'm making my peace with it, and even more than that, I'm quite thrilled with the comments, the caliber of comments I've gotten on my channel, both from the very personal to just casual conversation about books. I've really appreciated all of your interaction, and I've also appreciated commenting on other people's videos, and I will definitely continue to de-lurk and do that in 2018. And certainly I will find ways to interact with the community. I will certainly be doing more tags and hopefully more read-alongs sometimes. Some of my favorite memories of 2017 was doing my book buddy readathon with Curtis from Curtis Books and Films, and also reading a couple of the books that Anna and Eric put on their book club list. In the near future, I actually hope to read the Women's Reading Award winners from Kendra Winchester's podcast. So hopefully that'll be fun and exciting for all of you. And I also have a big non-fiction year-long reading-a-thon that I'll be doing. So yeah, I mean, I actually do assume that given everything, I will continue to have great interactions throughout 2018. And whether or not I lose my small fry booktube status, I think that it'll be very enriching, because I definitely found 2017 to be very enriching on booktube. So thank you. And that's all I have to say for now. I hope you're all having a great start to 2018, and hopefully wherever you are is a little warmer than where I am, where it's about 20 degrees Fahrenheit. Is it spring already? This is about the time when I keep whining that I want it to be May forever and ever. So keep warm if you have to, everyone. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.